We wanted to have Bob Roberts come up here, and I'd just like to spend a moment introducing Bob for some of you that have not met him before. He's been to many of these conferences, and this is really one of his important villages in his life. His project, Return, that he founded, has been the preeminent rehabilitation program, healing program for persons coming out of the hell of prison. And many of us think that it's a approach that has no peer and is one that should be spread widely abroad to help those who've been in the belly of the beast. And so his recent book, My Soul Said to Me, is the story, and we hope all of you will read this book and see an image and a story of a man who is being a man in a powerful and mature way. And we wanted to ask Bob to come up and read from My Soul Said to Me. Bob?
I owe so much gratitude to all of you here who have been doing work, men who've been coming here. This book was really nurtured and flowered here. Soon after I began this journey, I realized I was in deep shit, that I had really bitten off more than I could chew, and that I had better seek some allies and some teachers for help. And it wasn't long after that I started the work that I got a copy of Robert's Naive Mail and played it in the car one day on the way to the prison and knew that I had found one teacher and began to seek out Robert Bly. And it wasn't long after that that I came up here to my first conference. Well, I thought I would just do a little reading from this about a person who also was here. Harold Simmons, Jr., whom we knew as Bubba. Remember Bubba? Oh, yeah. I met Bubba when I first started the research I was doing in the prison. He was in the first grief workshop that we did. He was 24 years old. He had spent 13 of those 24 years incarcerated or institutionalized. He was first institutionalized when he was 6 years old. In that place, he was beaten so badly, when he was 9 years old, he pulled off an escape. And in 3 days, he was found 75 miles north on a railroad track. That's a marathon a day for a 9-year-old. The Mississippi State Police looked at how badly he had been beaten and would not let him return to Louisiana. He had been incarcerated so long that he said the outside world to him was like a dream he had one time. But he started some work, and he did serious work. He came in one time, he had shaved his head off. And this was before it was popular. And he looked absolutely crazy. I kept watching, and afterwards I kept speculating, why would he shave his head? Why would he shave his head? I went and asked him. He said, because it makes me look crazy. And if you're crazy, the guards will leave you alone. And right now, I need time to think. Something had started. Well, he was released within a couple of years after I started my research. And I followed him for a while. I gave him some clothes and money and got him into a place he could stay for 6 months. After a while, he disappeared. Lost track of him. I had a grandmother's phone number, and that disappeared. Well, one day at Project Return, we were talking about him, and I said, I'm going to find him. We were talking about two people. So my friend was going to find one, and I was going to find Bubba. So I remembered he was Harold Simmons, Jr. In the book, by the way, it's another Hardy Sanders. I remembered that he was a junior, so I began looking for a senior and found him that day up in Livingston Parish, Louisiana, and called him and got a phone number of where Bubba was. When I got him on the phone, he started weeping immediately, and he said, I can't believe you called me of all times tonight, because he planned that night to overdose on cocaine. His wife was a cocaine dealer. It's not the woman he was living with. So he said, wait a minute, let me get outside. He walked outside with a cordless phone and said, I just can't believe you called me of all people. And he said that he had gotten back on drugs, that he was broke. A friend loaned him some money and told him he would forgive the debt if he would help him pull off a burglary of a tobacco store. And they did and were caught. And he had already pled guilty, plea bargained with the prosecutor, and was facing 5 more years in prison. Besides that, he said, Bob, I think I have AIDS. I said, what makes you think that? He said, a girl I slept with told me she was HIV positive. And Bob, I don't want to die in prison. That's every prisoner's nightmare, to die in prison. So I said, did you go get tested? Yes, but it takes a month to get the results back at the charity hospital. So and he said he got tested, but his sentencing hearing was in 2 weeks. So I said, can you get down to New Orleans tomorrow? I can take him to Tulane Hospital where I worked, get you tested. I'll get the results the next day. So we did that. I had to leave for Chicago after we tested him. They called me in Chicago and said he's negative. So I called him back. We made an agreement on the phone. How about you don't commit suicide until I talk to the judge? He agreed to that. So a few weeks, I called the judge, and the judge would not see me, but he said, if you'll be here the morning of the hearing, perhaps I'll have some time. So I got there very early in Judge Arnold's office. Judge Arnold's, I got a few minutes in his chambers to tell him Bubba's story. And here's what he said. He said, I like this young man. And you know why? Because he's so honest. I've had him in my court before, and he's always respectful. He always tells the truth, and he's so sorry for screwing up again. And I'd like to help him out, but he's already pled guilty. He's already plea bargained his sentence with the prosecutor, and he made out pretty well given his record. This was a 4th offense. It could have been life. And he got 5 years. So right now, this whole thing is in the prosecutor's hands. You can talk to him, but it's awfully late in the game to try to change his mind. At this point, Bubba's lawyer walked in, a lawyer who was going to help him and didn't, who never showed up for any of the meetings with the prosecutor. And so he bargained unrepresented. And he had to be at the sentence. So the judge had issued a bench warrant for this lawyer's arrest. So he walks in, and the judge tells him why we're meeting, and said, well, we're going to have to wait on the prosecutor. He said, why don't you go out and talk to Bubba a minute, and when he come back when the prosecutor arrives. It's still very early in the morning. Well, as I was going down the hall, Bubba's prosecutor, Stan Brock, stepped off the elevator. When the lawyer, Bubba's lawyer, saw Brock, he blurted out, say, I hear we're going to get my client off. At this point, Stan started yelling at the man, sounding for all the world like a barking dog. Don't even think for one goddamn second you're going to waltz in here, and so on. The tirade continued all the way into the judge's office, and I figured we were dead in the water. I waited for the prosecutor to stop yelling before I joined them. Judge Arnold introduced me to Stan, who was sitting on a couch to the judge's right, his eyes red with anger. I remembered Tom Gamble's rule of conflict from the Aikido martial arts, that one should try to see his enemy's point of view. I took my seat next to the young prosecutor, so we would be looking at the room from the same perspective. When Judge Arnold and I told the prosecutor Bubba's story, he looked over at me and asked, "What do you think you can do with this guy?" I told him that if I could get him into Project Return for 90 days, I believed I could stabilize him and get him on a job, on an offshore oil rig. Best halfway house in the world. I'm serious. When Stan looked back at me, his eyes were still red, but now they were a little wet. He said, "You know, I actually like this kid. He's never tried to bullshit me, and he's been so apologetic that I've wanted to help him." Stan then turned to Judge Arnold and said, "You know, Judge, Mr. Sanders and I bargained this sentence without legal representation. If Bubba chose to appeal that, he could win. So I'm willing to drop the felony charge if we can charge him with something else to get him on probation so he'll have to go with Dr. Roberts and stay with him. What can we use?" "Well, there's actually a law that specifically prohibits the theft of crawfish," said the judge. While the laughter continued, I thought for a minute about what Melodoma had told me happens when taboos are broken in the indigenous world. The elders would have said to Bubba, "You have separated yourself from the ways of our village, and if you have to leave, then you will take away the gift you brought with you, and the village will be less than it was. Therefore, what can we do to help you rejoin our village and fulfill your purpose in coming to us?" So Bubba was not being sent away. As my thoughts came back to the room, the laughter was subsiding. The final charge mentioned something to do with donut holes. Then Judge Arnold turned to me and asked if I thought I could talk Bubba into accepting the new charges and pleading guilty to him. He was serious. Moments later, I was choking back the laughter as I sat in the courtroom listening to the black-robed Judge Arnold read the charges as soberly as a man could. "Mr. Sanders, you've been duly charged with bear wrestling within the city limits of Baton Rouge. How do you plead?" "Guilty, Your Honor." "Mr. Sanders, you've also been charged with misdemeanor theft of crawfish. How do you plead?" And so it went. Then Judge Arnold told Bubba he would have to go with me, remain under my supervision, if at any time, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And moments later, we were on the highway headed for New Orleans to find him a place to stay. Well, I'll just say this one. I want to mention when we brought Bubba to Minnesota. It was transforming for him, hanging out with serious, eloquent, positive, wounded, and zany older men. While here, he wrote this poem and read it right here. "Spirits seem to always be within distance. They hear when I weep and can sense the danger around the corner when I am blind to it. What are their names? I want to know so much about them. Time after time, they rescue me from the steel jaws of death, even when his teeth are in the very mirror of my existence. Why me? Who am I to deserve such guardians? After creating so much chaos and living in so much deceit, I have lived with that question hanging from the cobwebs of my mind for so long, hardly even giving thanks. I'm in so much fear of it because I never could grasp an understanding of it, but today I have no choice but to know they exist and are at work, carrying me through life and loving me even when I'm hating myself. Today I can no longer take it with a grain of salt. Today I want to know those spirits so I can talk to them, embrace them, sing to them, and give them thanks. So much thanks. Thank you.